And we're back in the car like we never left. Welcome to the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day, another pretty hot day with me here in New York. But once again, we're going to skip past all that promotional jazz and get right to the guts of the episode. Well, yesterday we discussed the action heroes Mount Rushmore. And there's no right answers. I did a Facebook post and they were all over the map. There were some people even included The Rock. Keanu Reeves has as much claim to an action hero's Mount Rushmore thanks to John Wick and obviously Neo in The Matrix, Mel Gibson, Kurt Russell. But the sort of basic four, if I'm asked, the basic four are Arnold Schwarzenegger, Harrison Ford, Tom Cruise. And if you want to put Stallone fourth, you can, but you could put Mel Gibson in there. It's all fun and entertaining. But one person who Arnold Schwarzenegger himself said has to be on any action hero's Mount Rushmore, not just because he's one of the greatest people who ever worked in the movie business, biggest stars, fantastic producer, director, multiple Oscar winner. Clint Eastwood Jr. was somebody who did things in action movies that hadn't been done before. First R-rated action thriller in Dirty Harry, doing his own stunts, jumping off a train trestle, could have killed himself. When he was told not to do it, he gave him one of these. This was a man who, despite the fact that he's now 95 and looks like a doddering old man, he was way ahead of his time. 32 years ago today saw the release of a movie which works on so many different levels. If you're a person like me who can do this. But this is an extraordinary film which works in so many different ways. And it is a swan song to what you might call early era Clint Eastwood. And does it in such a beautiful way that the fact that he shouldn't have even gotten the role, the fact that he wasn't even up for this role is incredible. But on top of everything else, this is a great, true Hollywood story of how the movie business works, why the movie business sometimes doesn't work, other times does, and how whispers and rumors and gossip and buzz often is injurious, it's harmful, but every once in a great while, whispers and rumors and buzz allows a legend already 62-year-old Clint Eastwood to slip into a role which fit him so perfectly, it's impossible to imagine that he was not on the potential sheet of people to call for this part. On this day, 1993, Wolfgang Petersen's sensational action thriller with a lot of heart and a romance that feels right, In the Line of Fire, opened in theaters. Now, to get the obvious nuts and bolts, because I mentioned the action hero Mount Rushmore, In the Line of Fire is as good a film as Clint Eastwood was in his career. He's not going to act anymore. They say he's looking at scripts. The man is 95, for fuck's sake. He's 95. James Dean was a year younger than Clint Eastwood. James Dean has been dead for 70 years. He was a year younger than Clint. Mickey Mantle's been gone 30 years. He was a year younger than Clint. And Clint is supposedly looking at scripts to make another movie. God bless Clint Eastwood. But the action heroes Mount Rushmore, In a Line of Fire, was an enormous box office hit in that crazy stacked summer of 1993 with Jurassic Park, with Arnold's last action hero, Stallone's cliffhanger, Harrison Ford's The Fugitive, right? The names they just keep repeating sometimes. That's the only summer where those four big hitters had a movie, and Tom Cruise in The Firm, throw him in there. Mel Gibson have a movie in 93. You know what? I should know these things offhand. I know that he had done Forever Young in 92. He was working on Maverick. But, Mel did Man Without a Face. He directed, but I don't think that he... Oh, no, he acted. He acted under prosthetics, man. That was a really depressing movie. But In the Line of Fire, 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. That might be the highest score I've ever seen for an action thriller. That's a crazy high score. Audiences loved it. Critics loved it. And the irony of it being some kind of a swan song. It was a swan song as far as Clint in a real action hero kind of mode. But 32 years later, I mean, he was closer to the beginning of his movie career in 1993 if you go forward, he didn't become a big movie star until 1962 when he did Fistful of Dollars. We're now more years after In the Line of Fire than A Fistful of Dollars was before In the Line of Fire. But many of you are familiar with the film, so I teased the kind of backstory and why, in a sense, this is one of those movies that puts Clint on the action hero Mount Rushmore. Because it's 22 years after Dirty Harry, where he did the kind of death-defying stunt work, that he starred in the first balls-out, hardcore, R-rated action thriller with real grimy, a disgusting villain, and there's nudity. There's a lot of really gray area political stuff that gets brought up in that film. It was way ahead of its time from almost every angle. Is Dirty Harry Callahan a good guy, a bad guy? Is he somewhere in between? Is Scorpio the real villain of that film, or is the villain the system? The system itself. Is that the villain of the film? And you get into a little of that kind of stuff in The Line of Fire. But the backstory as to how Clint Eastwood, so perfectly cast, he's as perfectly cast as Frank Horrigan as he was to play Harry Callahan more than 2 decades prior. But in the time of the early 90s, before Unforgiven, which was released summer 1992, Clint Eastwood's career had dipped. He'd had a pretty much uninterrupted run of success into the 1980s. And then, Heartbreak Ridge in 86 was a hit. That was the only movie he made while serving as mayor, one-term mayor of his adopted hometown, Carmel, California. He still lives there, still makes his home there. He only made Heartbreak Ridge. It was a box office hit. It made over $100 million, big gross, nominated for a couple of technical Oscars. It's certainly one of Clint's best performances. A really, super entertaining movie with a little bit of historical, the United States incursion into Grenada in the early 80s. That was something that really happened. But the fifth and final Dirty Harry film, The Deadpool, which despite being a really solid movie with 2 huge future stars playing big supporting roles in Jim Carrey and Liam Neeson, didn't do as well as it should have. And then Clint directed the movie Bird with a fantastic Forrest Whitaker. In another year, he certainly would have gotten an Oscar nomination. And there were many who thought that Clint should have gotten a nomination for Best Director. That was a pretty stacked year. You had Barry Levinson in Rain Man, Sir Alan Parker, who I love, Mississippi Burning, Lawrence Kasdan, Accidental Tourist. There just was no room for Clint. And Bird did not make any impression at the box office. Then he did Pink Cadillac with Bernadette Peters, a pretty funny movie. The problem with that film historically is the villains are white supremacists, and the movie is supposed to be a screwball comedy. Pro tip, don't have white supremacist villains if you're making a screwball comedy. I mean, imagine Cary Grant coming up against, I don't even want to think about it, in the 30s and 40s. You know where I'm going with that. Don't do it. That movie is entertaining, just don't think about it too much. Clint gives a really goofy and silly performance. He's entertaining, and Bernadette Peters is fucking awesome. The movie doesn't work, though, because the more you think about it, you say, why didn't they have the villains be something else? Why'd they have to do this? For what? But then he did, in 1990, should have been a big year for Clint. It should have been a big year because he had 2 major studio releases, one of which he acted in and directed. Well, no, actually, he acted and directed in both and produced both. He had The Rookie with Charlie Sheen releasing at the end of 1990. And he had White Hunter Black Heart, a project that he had apparently circled for quite some time. An adaptation, a very loose adaptation of when John Huston, the famous filmmaker, Angelica's dad, who did Maltese Falcon, African Queen, among many others, and Victory, speaking of Stallone, Mount Rushmore, Victory, my favorite, top 5 Sylvester Stallone films. I almost have it in my top 3. That film is a fucking masterpiece. John Huston. When John Huston was making The African Queen, the real story is that he became obsessed with the idea of going on a fucking safari and killing an elephant at the expense of making a movie. Bro, you're hired to direct a film, not kill an elephant. What do you do? Well, Clint Eastwood plays the John Huston kind of stand-in the world of the novel was written by a guy named Peter Vertel. In the world of the movie, played by an actor that I've always really liked. Funny, I can't remember. I'm sorry, Jeff Fahey. Jeff Fahey, who later did Lawnmower Man, the Stephen King adaptation, which wasn't really a Stephen King adaptation. But Jeff Fahey, very interesting actor with a very good face for the movies. and a kind of minimalist style. He did Blue Steel. I think he was in Blue Steel with Jamie Lee Curtis, if I'm not mistaken. Was it Blue Steel? I know he was in a movie that was directed by Sandra Locke. Sandra Locke didn't direct Blue Steel. It was Catherine Bigelow. I'm drawing a blank. But point is, White Hunter Blackheart was the kind of film that was Oscar bait. And it didn't do well at the box office. It was never going to be a big hit. It opened in limited release, and it didn't really connect with audiences. Very few people I knew saw it. There were some critics that thought it was in the top 5 best films of 1990. A very stacked year. You had Goodfellas and Dances with Wolves. Those were the kind of 2 big hitters of the year. And Silence of the Lambs should have come out in 1990, and that would have really fucked shit up. And I believe that Martin Scorsese wins Best Director and Goodfellas wins Best Picture if Silence of the Lambs ends up being released in 1990, as it should have, because the film was wrapped. But there were issues with the distributor. That's a whole other story. But White Hunter Blackheart did not make enough of an impression with critics and or audiences. It made 10 best lists. Richard Schickel, Rex Reed, another terrific critic from the era, loved it. Rex Reed had never been a Clint Eastwood fan, and then all of a sudden he became like a fanboy. The turn of Rex Reed was really something to see. But it appeared that Clint's time on the A-list had ended. It doesn't mean he wouldn't have worked. He would have. He would have always been able to work because he shot on the cheap. And every single movie that Clint Eastwood produced and or directed, going back to the early 1970s, I think the first film with the Malpaso Productions banner might have been Joe Kidd. I'm not sure. He didn't direct that, but I think that he might have produced it. The point is, every single movie that Clint Eastwood had produced and or directed up to the point of White Hunter Blackheart, he brought in on time and under budget. You want to talk about a record that'll never be broken? There's a record that'll never be broken. Bringing in every single film, including Juror Number 2 in 2024, on time and under budget. So he's always going to be able to work, get something done. But his career had dipped. He had a number of films which should have been box office successes and or critical darlings. It just didn't work out that way. So he had his kind of, I don't want to say get out of jail free card, but he had his magic ticket. And he wasn't 100% sure that it was really going to be a magic ticket. In this case, the magic ticket was the ticket back right onto the A-list like that. Sometime in the 1970s, Clint read a screenplay called The William Money Killings by a guy named David Webb Peoples. And if the name sounds familiar, he was also the credited writer on Blade Runner. He didn't write the book. The book was written by Philip K. Dick, of course, who did a lot of other big science fiction films such as Minority Report, Paycheck with Ben Affleck. We can remember it for you wholesale with Arnold Schwarzenegger. You might know it better by its movie title, Total Recall. But Clint had read this screenplay by David Webb Peoples called William Money Killings, and he bought it. And he always intended to star in it, but he felt like in the 70s when he, the Outlaw Josie Wales days, and even to the 80s, he didn't think that he was old enough to believably play this character, a kind of man with no name, but dirtier and grimier and nastier than that. Somebody who may not, in fact, be a decent person underneath all the gunplay. So after the failures, the multiple failures, really starting with the Deadpool, as I say, a movie that should have done better because it's a pretty high quality. I mean, I think that it might be the second best Dirty Harry film of the 5. But again, that's just my opinion. Has a lot of great moments, and Clint's performance is just terrific, right on the button in that movie. But he decided now's the time, sometime in early to mid 1991. Now is the time. After the failure of The Rookie, the dual failures, The Rookie and White Hunter Blackheart just not getting any awards play whatsoever. I know he was bitterly disappointed because that's a really good movie. He got as much out of Jeff Fahey as anybody. Jeff Fahey was still, giving real emotive performances, and then he started doing this minimalist thing, which for him, I think works very well. But Clint took the William Money Killings to Warner Brothers. And again, the man from Malpaso, the nickname that Clint has gone by, it's not an accidental name. His production shingle, his production company that has existed since at least, I think Kelly's Heroes was the last movie that Clint had a big hand in that was not a Malpaso production. He had a shingle at Warner. He produced and directed everything under the Warner Brothers imprimatur, under the studio banner, if you will. So he brought the William Money killings to the bosses at Warner's and said, look, guys, I know that I've maybe let you down a little bit, but I think I can make this movie not for a ton of money, and the script is great, and what do you think? And they loved the script. They weren't sure that there was still a market for Westerns. The kind of Western genre had sort of dipped in the 80s, even with the success of Silverado and Pale Rider, but they had Lonesome Dove had been out, and it just was an idea that maybe this isn't the best time. Maybe this isn't the best time for this film. But Warner Brothers, they took a risk. They took a risk. They didn't take the same risk when Stanley Kubrick tried to get AI going the following year, because that was going to cost $200 million, and they couldn't figure out how a movie like that could turn a profit. They had to turn Kubrick down, and that movie didn't get made until, unfortunately, after Kubrick passed, and Spielberg picked it up and directed it himself. But Warner Brothers hoped that they were right, and Clint said, I'm pretty sure that I can get, a lot of big names here, and they're going to maybe they won't work for scale. You're not going to have to pay Gene Hackman $10 million or Morgan Freeman a ton of money. Let me see what I can do. So Clint got Hackman, Morgan Freeman, and the fantastic Sir Richard Harris. If you don't know the name, he was the original Albus Dumbledore. He played Albus Dumbledore in the first, I think, 2 Harry Potter movies till he passed. And then Michael Gambon, who unfortunately also recently passed, he took over the mantle, and he was terrific. But Sir Richard Harris, what an incredible actor. So Clint went ahead, and in Alberta, Canada, he shot Unforgiven, brought it in on time and under budget. And he prepared a cut for the bosses at Warner Brothers. Now, all of this backstory, maybe it was interesting, maybe it was not interesting. I apologize if it wasn't, but there's a reason why I've given you all this backstory. As Clint was getting ready to show a kind of director's cut, it was close to the final version. In fact, this so-called cut that he was showing to the studio heads at Warner may in fact have been the movie which was released in August. This part is not clear. Nowadays we would know, but in 1992, the only reporting, and you can look this up, Hollywood Reporter and Daily Variety reported on what I'm about to say. So in this time where Clint was just about ready to show a cut of Unforgiven, it had been retitled by that point, to the bosses who had funded the project at Warner. Clint Eastwood's agent, Lenny Hershand. I get mixed up. Lenny Niehaus was the composer who worked with Clint. Lenny Hershand heard of a project that Castle Rock and I believe Columbia was trying to get together about a Secret Service agent who, as a rookie agent, had fucked up, maybe lost his nerve, we don't really know, and failed to stop the Kennedy assassination. And now, 30 years later, a guy with an axe to grind, a former United States government agent who did some terrible things for God and country, decides he wants to kill the president, basically, is the story. And Eastwood's agent had heard of the project, and there were some reports that Dustin Hoffman had been involved, which was true. It was Dustin Hoffman who came up with the idea of the Kennedy angle that was not in the original screenplay by Jeff McGuire. But at this particular juncture, they did not have anyone locked in to play the lead character of Frank Horrigan. And the kind of twisted part of this is that I can't believe that Dustin Hoffman was offered the role. Like, that is so sick. And he was involved for a couple of months, and then he dropped out. That role wasn't for him. Try to imagine Dustin Hoffman if you've seen the movie. I mean, come on. I love Dustin Hoffman, but that ain't happening. I had no way. Then there was an idea that maybe Tom Cruise. The studio started thinking, well, maybe we'll have it be a younger agent, and maybe his father was the agent who fucked up with Kennedy. They're going down all kinds of directions. So Eastwood's agent puts in a phone call. Clint would definitely be interested. He's been looking, and I don't know if this part is true, but this is what the agent said. He's been looking for something that he can just show up and act, and he doesn't need to be involved in the production. He's been working, as you know, a heavy schedule, and he just wrapped a movie, and he just finished it. So Hershand actually called Castle Rock. That was Rob Reiner's company. We didn't speak to Rob Reiner. He spoke to a high-level executive at Castle Rock, and he said, can Clint and I come in for a meeting? Because the way that this project is described, he's the right age, and I think that the fact that it's Clint, this sounds terrific. Whoever he spoke to at Castle Rock uttered just an unbelievable phrase by way of getting Hershand off the phone. He said, "We're not in the Clint Eastwood business anymore." That is as vicious a crack. And I don't think the guy was trying to do that, but he was basically saying, we know your guy's history. His time has passed. And ironically, in the world of the movie, Frank Horrigan's time maybe has passed. So there's all sorts of ironies that you can get into. But in this instance, Castle Rock turned them down. He wouldn't even take a meeting. They were fixated. Maybe we can retrofit. We can get Tom Cruise interested. Luckily, Cruise read the script. He said, this is great, but I can't play this role because this is for an older actor. Well, no, we can change it. No, this script is great. Make this movie, but it's not for me. And Tom was doing the firm that, what ended up being the firm in the summer of 93 anyway. So they wouldn't even take a meeting with Clint Eastwood. But within a couple of days of Eastwood's agent all but getting laughed off the phone, Clint Eastwood showed his cut of Unforgiven to the studio heads at Warner's, and they hit the proverbial ceiling. Now, there are times, and I told a story on the podcast at the beginning of the podcast, where most of these same executives were convinced that Brian De Palma's adaptation of Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities was going to be an enormous box office and critical success, while at the same time, they were also convinced that Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas was a complete clusterfuck, disaster. We're screwed. Maybe we can do, a Batgirl from 2022. If they didn't say that, maybe we can just do a tax write-off and get this stink bomb off our ledger. Well, they got that wrong. But when Unforgiven screened, the Warner Brothers high-level people were ecstatic. They were just hoping that Clint was going to turn in a serviceable film. And when they saw the cast and everything, and the budget was not outlandish, I think it was 15 to 20 million. They thought, okay, we can at least get our money back. We gave Clint the opportunity, whatever. But when they saw the movie, they started seeing multiple Oscar nominations across the board. And the intensity of how much they liked it, word began to leak around town. And unlike the previous experience, which was not reported at the time, I should point out, Julie Salomon, the author of The Devil's Candy, the story of the ill-fated movie adaptation of Bonfire of the Vanities, the disastrous test screening of Goodfellas was not reported at the time. That didn't come out until Salomon's book was released. She kept that under wraps. There wasn't any reason to release it. So at this point in time, when word leaked that Clint just knocked one out of the park and he is about to make the comeback that no one saw coming, when that got out, and Hollywood Reporter and Variety was putting blind items, but they were blind items that were sourced enough where the reporters were running with it. All of a sudden, you start saying stuff like Oscar nominations across the board. This might be a Best Picture winner. It's probably going to kick ass at the box office. All of a sudden, with Tom Cruise turning down Castle Rock and by extension Columbia Pictures, well, maybe we actually are still in the Clint Eastwood business. So Eastwood's agent gets a call, big surprise, right? But this is how the movie business works. Whispers, rumor, and gossip. Eastwood's agent gets a call. Whoever's on the phone apologizes to the agent. Whoever spoke, they shouldn't have said it that way. We should have had you and Clint in for a meeting. We're sorry. If you are still interested, we are very interested. And then, needless to say, Clint Eastwood's agent and Clint Eastwood took a meeting. They sign on the line that is dotted, and they go and they make a movie. And by the time In the Line of Fire is in post-production, Unforgiven has won 4 Oscars, including Best Picture for Clint, Malpaso Productions, and by extension Warner Brothers, and for Clint as Best Director. So In the Line of Fire opened 32 years ago today, and the advance buzz was also through the roof in the mostly pre-internet. I know some people had Earthlink and Mindspring in the summer of 93, but it was still mostly analog back then. But the advance buzz from Entertainment Weekly, Premiere Magazine, and some of the other publications, as I say, Variety, was that In the Line of Fire was probably the best movie of the summer. And I believe it actually was the best of that stacked movie summer. So the story, if you don't know it, and I'm sure if you're this far into this episode you do, but in brief, it's about a capable, aging but intelligent and resourceful Secret Service agent named Frank Horrigan, who is age appropriate. I believe he's supposed to be the same age that Clint was in the world of the film. Maybe he's supposed to be slightly younger. Maybe he's a washout in his late 50s, not, 62 as Clint was when this film, went before the cameras. Maybe he's supposed, I think it's age appropriate, but he's somebody who is haunted by the fact that he was right next to Kennedy when those shots came down, and he did not react quickly enough to maybe take the bullet that would have killed him, but he might have been able to do his objective, unfortunately, take a bullet for the president. And, again, I don't like getting political here, but I was a little boy when John Hinckley Jr. tried to kill Ronald Reagan. And terrible as it is, if you watch that footage, you see two separate Secret Service agents looking to jump in front of the fucking shooter and take whatever shot this guy is dealing. It's terrible, but that's what you're supposed to do. And in the world of In the Line of Fire, what we are led to believe, it's teased for most of the film, and it isn't until a late scene that Frank Horrigan explains what he saw, what he did, and what happened on that terrible day in Dallas. So Frank Horrigan is not on presidential detail. In an early scene with his partner, played by a very young and a strong performance by Dylan McDermott, they're working a counterfeiting case. And it's kind of funny if you're a more contemporary movie fan, if you like the Saw series, the actor who plays Jigsaw, funny, I can't remember his name, but the actor who plays Jigsaw is this high-level counterfeiter that Frank Horrigan and his partner Al are trying to, and we don't realize, we think that they're working with the guy. So he's not doing presidential detail as the film opens. But then he gets what he thinks is a crank call, but he gets a call from a guy who purports to be a potential assassin, right to the top. I'm not going to say it again. And he insults Frank Horrigan, basically implying, it's unfortunate the way your life turned out. It's kind of stupid to have to throw yourself in front of bullets and maybe give up your life for somebody. How do you know he's better than you? I think you're better than that guy. I think you're better than this guy, Frank. But I also don't think you had the guts. I think that's why you froze up. You just didn't have the guts. And who could blame you for thinking that your life is just as valuable as anyone else's? So there's a lot of psychology and mind games. But this assassin who goes by Booth, his name is actually Mitch Leary, and it's played by John Malkovich in easily a top 5 greatest villain performances ever. It's a Lex Luthor supervillain performance. And, in the world of the movie, Mitch Leary is maybe the most dangerous man alive because he doesn't look like much, but he has elite fighting skills for someone his size, and he just doesn't give a fuck. And that can, in showdown situations, if you don't care whether you live or die, like in the way of Martin Riggs, you have a decided advantage in these situations. And we get the idea that as much as Frank Horrigan may be a bit of a washout, borderline alcoholic, he does care. He's not suicidal. In much the way that Harry Callahan might be a little bit of a rogue and a daredevil, but he ain't trying to die out there. He's not trying to die. He's not Martin Riggs. He is doing his job. Frank Horrigan gets transferred to Secret Service detail, and he seemingly butts heads with a crackerjack Secret Service agent played by Rene Russo. I think this is her best performance. I mean, Rene Russo, what an end boss. So many great movies, holding her own with Travolta and Mel Gibson 3 times. And who else? I am Jim Belushi, if you want to go Mr. Destiny. But she was somebody who was just Dustin Hoffman in Outbreak, never backed down, and playing Thor's mom, in the Avengers. What was her name? Frigga. Just a terrific actress. So they butt heads, but a romance blooms between them. And yeah, there's an age gap, but it's believable in the world of the story because Frank Horrigan, for all of the rough edges, he's really a good guy. And it might be, this is a very rare conventional leading man role in terms of there's an A story and then a romantic subplot, which is not just thrown in like an artificial limb, but that really pays off. The stakes feel higher because they're both ostensibly working to take down John Malkovich's Mitch Leary. And I remember the day the movie came out. Again, no internet. My dad and I, we looked at the newspaper, and already the critical screening had happened a week or so prior. The ad in Newsday showed just astonishing rave reviews. I've never saw a thriller that got reviews like this, not even Terminator 2. This might be the single best thriller ever made. 4 stars, Clint's best performance, Oscar nominations across the board. This is what was written. So Dad and I, we went to see it. We saw it opening day, and at the time we were living in Woodbury. The Broadway Mall in Hicksville, for you Long Islanders, hadn't opened yet. The movie theater hadn't opened. That was a couple of years away. The nearest theater that had it at a time where it was possible for us to go was Green Acres. That's in Valley Stream. Now, I got to tell you, to drive from Woodbury to Valley Stream, you got to really want to see the movie, but we really wanted to see the movie. And it was like a 5 or maybe a 6 o'clock, viewing or showing. And there wasn't a seat in the house. It was playing on 2 screens there. So I was happy. I was already a big Clint fan. This is just going to tear up the box office. And damned if the movie wasn't even better than I hoped. Because I thought maybe there was a little bit of, Clint having just won the Oscar for Unforgiven. Maybe there was a little bit of, boosting him up or trying to keep him because he was a popular figure in Hollywood. But what an incredible thriller. And when I talk about the different levels the movie works on, you don't have to go deep. You can just, and it had a long run on Netflix, I think in 2022, you can just watch this. If you only know Clint Eastwood, the old guy, whatever, you maybe saw him, you saw a clip from Juror Number 2 where he was directing Nicholas Hoult. If you don't know Clint Eastwood, this is one of the movies I recommend. If you're somebody who is, well, I know the name, but I don't know any of his movies, give me one. This is one of them. You could go with Dirty Harry and In the Line of Fire. That would be the 2 that I would show if you're saying, give me a primer, just give me 2 movies. To understand his screen persona, how did this guy become such a big deal just as an actor? Well, he didn't direct either of those movies, so these would be 2. So it just worked beautifully. But the idea of the history of Clint Eastwood, the fact that at a certain point in his career, in the Dirty Harry era, Harry Callahan, despite getting beat around in the original movie, he's more or less indestructible. He's an Energizer bunny. He can be hurt, but only for a time. And he's so tough, you could bust his jaw. You could probably give him a concussion. You can break 4 of his ribs. He's gonna fucking come after you the same fucking night. That's what happens in Dirty Harry. Frank Horrigan is not Harry Callahan. He's tough, but he's tough within normal parameters. And the fact that he's older is part of the story. The reality is that Harry Callahan would have not had that much difficulty. I think that he would. I don't think Mitch Leary would have gone after Harry Callahan. That's a guy you stay away from because you know Harry's going to shoot first. He ain't going to be fucking around trying to hit me in the leg. And if I'm going to fall to my death, he ain't reaching out at a hand. He's going to do what Horrigan actually says, even though he doesn't mean it. I'll be thinking about that when I'm pissing on your grave. So In the Line of Fire ended up grossing $187 million on a budget of around 40. So by any metric, an enormous box office hit. And it is a film that has a huge rewatchability factor because there are numerous great scenes. And even though we know what's coming, and in the manner of like a Steven Spielberg action film, like the Indiana Jones trilogy, the original trilogy, for example, we look forward to certain parts in the movie that we can enjoy again and again. And without spoiling it, there is a moment towards the end of the film. Well, there are 2. There's one where Clint's character figures out the guy is here and I got to stop him. And if it means my life, it means my life. And he's just going to do it. That's one. There is another moment, and when I talked about the history of Clint Eastwood and why everything he had done in the first 3 decades of his career, it all feels like it's leading to this particular role in this movie. Somebody whose history started right around the time of the Kennedy. Like all of this stuff, Clint became a big movie star right around that time. He had been on, the Western, the Rawhide, the TV show, and he'd done a number of bit roles like Tarantula with John Agar. He worked with Rock Hudson. But there's a moment in this film where Clint's character, he's made a mistake, and he's being taken off this particular detail where the president is coming in the next day, and Frank Horrigan thinks that whatever is going to happen if I'm not there, the president's dead. You guys, and Rene Russo says, we got 200 agents, doesn't matter. He's going to kill, he's going to do it. He's going to get it done if I'm not here, but he's about to be sent away. And there's a moment in a hotel room with Rene Russo and Clint Eastwood. And Clint finally, his character Frank, tells the story of that fateful day in Dallas. And in the script, it's just that he tells the story and Lily Raines, that's Renee's character, listens. But in the moment, Clint Eastwood did something that I don't think he ever did in a movie. He started crying. Now I'm telling you, there's a guy sitting behind me who freaked the fuck out. He kept saying, he's not crying, he's not crying, he's not crying. Is he crying? He's not crying. There's no way. The macho man, the bastion of masculinity, and I'm not making jokes. It's not toxic. But this was the guy. This is the guy. The spaghetti westerns, 5 Dirty Harry films, climbing the fucking Eiger mountain in the Eiger Sanction, doing the stunts himself. This is the guy. This is the cinematic alpha, even more so than John Wayne. And here he is telling the story in character of that terrible day in Dallas, and he breaks down. And Rene Russo's character was not supposed to cry, and she starts crying. And then they hold hands, and we don't know, the first time we see the movie, we don't know what's going to happen. We know it's going to be bad. One or both of them might end up dead. But it is a moment of such power and beauty. And when Clint takes the kind of final lap, when he announces his retirement, this is the scene. This and It's a Hell of a Thing Killing a Man from Unforgiven, to me, are his two best pieces of film acting. And I prefer this one just for the historical, the understanding of this guy giving this monologue and crying. Doesn't get any better. And I believe that this is the single finest performance that Clint Eastwood ever gave in a movie. He could have gotten a Best Actor nomination, but 93 was just a crazily stacked year all around. And Best Actor, the fact that Anthony Hopkins didn't win for Remains of the Day is ridiculous. But it ended up being a deserving winner, Tom Hanks in Philadelphia. But if Clint had been nominated, nobody would have batted an eye because he is just magnificent, more open with the face, the smiles, the kind of semi-insulting way that he flirts with Rene Russo, who gives it right back to him. I should point out also, there's a famous scene at the Lincoln Memorial where Clint flirts, we think unsuccessfully, with Rene Russo, and he has a moment where, as she's walking away, and he says, if she looks back, that means she's interested. And then when she looks back, the audience cheered. That scene was written by Carrie Fisher, just for reference, the late, great Princess Leia herself, Carrie Fisher. But there's so much to talk about with this movie, and I've already run way long. I apologize. But I am as big a Clint Eastwood fan as there is, and if he's on an action hero's Mount Rushmore, this is one of those movies that puts him there. Because that summer, Harrison with The Fugitive, Arnold with Last Action Hero, very underrated film, Sly with Cliffhanger, Clint within the Line of Fire. Clint produced the best movie. For being honest, The Fugitive is the second best, and I'll have Last Action Hero and Cliffhanger tied for third. I think Last Action Hero was way better than it appeared to be at the time. But In the Line of Fire, and the crazy, torturous way that Clint Eastwood even got cast in this film. Released on this day, 1993, directed by Wolfgang Peterson, from a screenplay by Jeff McGuire. Jeff Apple was the name of one of the producers that put the project together. And starring Clint Eastwood, Rene Russo, John Mahoney, former United States Senator Fred Dalton Thompson, and a sensational John Malkovich in an Oscar-nominated, should have won, turn as the fearsome supervillain level Mitch Leary. This has been episode 578 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all so much for spending some of your hopefully happy hump day here in New York as I talk about one of my favorite people and a top 3 best film in his career. But if you check out this episode on the YouTube channel, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Podbean, Spotify, iTunes, or the others in which we're hosted, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. I'll be back with a new episode real soon. Till then,